Hey team, and welcome back to another video in the Astrological Magical Elections video series. Today we're going to talk about magical election opportunities that will be available for us to pick up from the Taurus full moon on November 19th until the Sagittarius new moon on December 4th. So just sort of our typical word of warning during this period is that these two lunations, the Taurus new moon and the Sagittarius full moon, are eclipses. Taurus, the one in Taurus being a lunar, and the one in Sagittarius being a solar eclipse. And our typical eclipse kind of warnings, our eclipse season warnings apply here. Eclipses are not generally good times to do magic, especially magic for growth and development kinds of situations. They tend to have a more toxic and more negative energy associated with them. They might be more better used for like banishing and cleansing, but for kind of our purposes in these videos, we don't really... We avoid them really as much as we can, which ends up working out fine because we also don't tend to use magic, or at least I don't recommend a lot of times doing magic during new and full moons anyway, so we kind of get to miss out on a lot of the chaos, I guess, that eclipses can typically generate. So all that to say, eclipses are coming. They're generally not good and positive energy to dip into. They're not supercharged moons. They are the deprivation of the light from the world. So not super great. Today I don't have a whole lot of charts to share with you guys, partly because the waning moon is in sort of an awkward place in the zodiac to where that the lunar mansions that the moon will move through during this time while she's waning aren't super conducive to waning moon applications. So when the moon is waning, we typically want to focus on talismans that can help us to get rid of things, or cleanse ourselves, or just kind of move on and close chapters essentially. But a lot of the mansions that the moon is moving through right now aren't really aligned to that purpose. They're much more growth oriented. So there wasn't a whole lot for us to really work with right now. And so because of that, the North American continent only gets one electional opportunity, which is shared for the other two in places, Europe and Australia. But Europe and Australia get a couple of star options to play with that the North American continent doesn't get. So we're going to handle this one a little bit differently. We're going to do we're going to talk about the one chart that everybody gets, and then kind of the differences between the different locations before moving on to talk about like Europe specifically and then Australia specifically. North America won't have a specific kind of part in this video because they only have the one which is shared by everyone. So it's easier just to kind of like talk about it and get that out of the way first. So our first election opportunity, which is shared for all three locations, North America, Western Europe, and Australia, is going to be for... Well, I guess I shouldn't start with the times. It's going to be different. But it's going to be for a 14th Lunar Mansion talisman. And the 14th Lunar Mansion is one that is more specifically oriented for a waning moon because it is about separation. It's about getting us separate from things that we no longer want in our lives. It's not growth oriented. The image in the 14th Lunar Mansion is about is a dog chasing its tail, essentially, which is kind of an apt description of what happens when people try to gain and to create during this time. It's kind of an image of wasted energy, sort of like the futile chase of a dog trying to catch their tail. So that means that the 14th Lunar Mansion is really more utilized in separation rituals, in moving us beyond things and helping us get rid of things. So it can be used, it's kind of like the 14th and the 12th Lunar Mansion are similar in a lot of ways, but the 14th Lunar Mansion tends to be a little bit more forceful. So what ends up happening is the 14th Lunar Mansion can be used kind of offensively in a way to help us like move beyond situations or people or jobs or environments that we don't want to be a part of anymore, or it can be used a little bit more kind of like self-restoratively, I suppose you could say, to help you kind of move beyond or process specifically negative emotional trauma. It can be what the 14th Lunar Mansion is used for, to help you kind of move beyond or create skills to help you move beyond some of these situations that you have. I don't really like to use this term because I feel like it's kind of like loaded or dismissive, but like baggage about the 14th Lunar Mansion can be really helpful to clear that stuff out and help you get rid of things, which might be a nice sort of preamble to the eclipse, I guess, depending on where it falls in a chart for you. But there's that. So all these charts are going to be relatively similar in how they're set up, but our North American chart for this is going to be on November 29th at 1:30 in the morning-ish. And so as you can see, this chart, we've got the moon conjoined the ascendant in the 14th lunar mansion. It's a waning moon phase, which is really great. And at the same time, the moon is applying the sextile to the sun, who is involved in the... y'all stop. And at this time, the moon is applying the sextile to the sun, Mercury, Cazimi, while the ruler of the first house is this Mercury who is involved in this Cazimi, who is unafflicted by Mars or Saturn. And I really liked this. I was really happy to get this kind of configuration, because getting like a decently usable Cazimi configuration in a talisman is actually kind of difficult, just because the timing is super exact, and you don't always have everything line up for you like you need it in that very small window. But for this, I really liked it just because Cazimis tend to be about like renewal, about refreshing. And I thought that was a really helpful. I feel like this is a really helpful energy to lean into for the 14th lunar mansion, even though it's a little bit kind of at odds, I guess, with the 14th lunar mansion messaging, which is about getting rid of things. But often after we have like the weight of something off of our shoulders, we feel much more refreshed and stronger for having undergone that. And so I felt like the Cazimi energy was very appropriate here for that. The idea of being refreshed and moving on from something that was kind of weighing you down before. Like perfect. That's exactly what we want here. The Western European version is almost exactly the same. It takes place on November 29th at around 2 o'clock in the morning. This chart's set for 1:54. And we have a very similar setup with the moon conjoined the ascendant in the 14th lunar mansion, she'll be applying to the sun. It looks like she's applying to Mercury in this chart right now. But Mercury will overtake the sun before the moon gets to them. So she'll be applying to the sun eventually. But still, we're leaned into that very Cazimi Mercury energy here. That refreshing, that renewal. I really like this. Mars and Saturn are still averse, which is really great. And then our final election for this is the Australian version, which looks quite different just because the moon has to be on the midheaven. But the moon is in the midheaven here in the 14th lunar mansion, and she is also still applying that sextile to the Mercury Cazimi, except for now it's happening in the 11th house instead of down in the 3rd house in the North American and Western European versions. But here we also have Venus conjoin the ascendant, which I thought was really nice too, just kind of like help soften, make the process easier of letting go, whatever it is that you're trying to move past. So just all in all, I thought these charts were really interesting, and I was really glad that it was something that multiple places in the world, and probably everywhere in the world, will get to experience to some degree. So it just seems like a really nice time to kind of cast off the shackles that bind you in a way, to move on from a lot of these things that maybe aren't helping us move forward anymore, or starting to really hold us back in whatever area of life we're looking to make positive the developments in. So just sort of our handy hijacking or hacking of the more difficult lunar mansions to facilitate future growth. So that was our 14th lunar mansion talisman that each location in the world will get to share, but was the only potential electional talisman for the North American continent. So now we're going to move into talking about Western Europe and their two sort of unique elections. And the first one is very similar to the previous chart that we showed. If this chart looks familiar, it's because I literally just showed it to you. But it is also going to be, this was the 14th lunar mansion chart, but we can also make it serve as a potential Alkaid fixed star talisman. We'll just need to move the time forward a tiny bit to get 27 degrees Virgo on the ascendant, which happens at around 2:02 a.m. So fixed star Alkaid is actually a very interesting and very unique star in my opinion, in that it does a lot. Like the fixed Alkaid does a lot of stuff. It covers a lot of bases, so it tends to be very useful for a lot of people, like kind of regardless of what their situation is. So one of the things that Alkaid is useful for is that it helps protect people and property from potential theft. So obviously that's very useful in a lot of kind of practical mundane applications, I guess. You can use Alkaid talismans to literally protect your home from being burgled. You could use it to help keep your car from being broken into, but I also recommend Alkaid talismans for use in less obvious physical ways, and also for protection against things like identity theft, against your information being leaked. It seems like we can't go very long in the news without hearing about some major company that's had its data breached. And like hundreds of thousands of customer files have been leaked and their information is everywhere. So having Alkaid talismans can help kind of protect protect and shield you from experiencing those or from your information getting leaked. So I just think it's a good talisman to have, kind of like your really nice kind of 21st century uses of a talisman. Alkaid also has kind of particular or specific medical applications in that it's talked about specifically to protect against poison. And that is an interesting term to use, I think, because while I often think about it being used to help individuals who have allergies to something, or for individuals who maybe are on a difficult medication to help kind of tone down or reduce any sort of flare-ups associated with side effects. People who are going through really difficult medical procedures or treatments, Alkaid can help, kind of spare them from a lot of the more difficult or negative manifestations or side effects from that. So it's useful to have for individuals who may be going through like chemotherapy, for instance. Alkaid is also said to have the property to dispel enchantments, and I think this is super useful in a lot of contexts. Obviously there's the helping in to dispel any sort of magical gunk you think might be coming your way, helping to dispel or remove any sort of malefic attachments that you feel may be attached to you or to things or to, a location. It's also useful, and it's also a helpful tool to use in sort of like deconsecration or in cleansing rituals. So Alkaid's useful for that too. And then sort of finally, Alkaid is said to be useful for hunters and people who work with animals. So the basic idea is like it helps calm down unruly animals. So if you are a person who kind of works more hands-on with animals, this could be a useful talisman as well to kind of help protect you from, well, maybe not, I guess the context is like to help protect you from being attacked by an animal. But just kind of like keeping animals calm, helping to soothe animals, helping to make animals more cooperative with you, is I guess like a form of protection, but I really feel like it's more centered on the animal itself than it is on like just keeping the person safe. So all in all, Alkaid has a lot of really great applications and utilizations. Highly recommended as a star. And so we're going to go ahead and talk about our election now. And for the Western European version of this, we have the moon applying to the conjunction of the fixed star Alkaid, while Alkaid rises on the ascendant. Alkaid's projected ecliptical degree is 27 degrees Virgo and 10 minutes, so kind of right on top of it. And at the same time, the moon is applying to the Mercury Cazimi. It's really just the same chart as the 14th Lunar Mansion talisman chart. But our difference here is, well, not really our difference here, I guess, but the thing to kind of like talk about is, as you can see in the graphic, the nature of Alkaid is of the moon and Venus. So it's a little bit different in how you elect for it because it has the lunar it has the lunar nature to it. And obviously the moon can't apply to herself. So ideally, you would want moon-Venus connections in Alkaid charts. That would be like the gold standard. Just kind of bringing in and incorporating both of those natures in at the same time. But the moon can do this job by herself. Like, she doesn't really need Venus. Since Alkaid is of the nature of the moon, they're already kind of naturally connected. So all you really need is to have a connection to something else that's good enough. And so I feel like the Mercury Cazimi is that in this instance. So ideally you would want like the Venus connection, but I think the Mercury Cazimi connection is itself useful enough and overall good enough to be able to facilitate this connection with Alkaid and kind of bring it down to Earth. So Australia is also able to do this with Alkaid, where the 14th Lunar Mansion talisman time could also serve as an Alkaid talisman time. North America was unable to do this because by the time their setup came around for the 14th Lunar Mansion, the moon was at like 29 degrees Virgo, and the moon needs to be applying to the star. So the moon would need to be before 27 degrees, like she was in the Western European and the Australian versions of this chart. So as you can see, we have this chart's a tiny bit different, but I actually think it's better. I think I like this one better. To where we have the moon and Alkaid now culminating on the midheavens, so that's just kind of how it has to be in Australia, I guess. And we're still applying to the Mercury Cazimi, which, like I said, I think serves the purpose fine. But I like this one a little bit better because we have Venus right on the ascendant. So this one pulls in that Venus signature better than the Western European version of the chart. So the Venus signature isn't necessary; it's an ideal, but an ideal that the Australian version covers in some way by having Venus very angular on the ascendant that the Western European version wasn't able to really bring in. So I think the Australian version is just a better one, like just how it all came out ends up having a better setup, but they should both work perfectly fine. So our next electional opportunity is also for Western Europe, and this comes on December 2nd at just before 6 a.m. And this is going to be an opportunity for an Alphecca fixed star talisman. So Alphecca is a fixed star that is of the nature of Mars and Venus, and it's more of like a social star. Alphecca is useful in that it helps people kind of break into spaces, more or less. The idea that Alphecca helps give you the confidence and the kind of attractability to be yourself and really highlights the best parts of you to help you be more comfortable and at ease in social situations where maybe you have, anxiety surrounding or something like that. Alphecca is also useful in that it helps to put you in the right places, to give you the important and uplifting and helpful friendships and relationships that you need in your life. So Alphecca is not super about creating shallow relationships, but Alphecca wants to put you in the path of the right people who can bring out the best in you in some real way. Maybe that's just the best in you in like a career goal, helping put you in the right path of people who can help you advance in that respect, or people who make you feel good, people who are good to be around, good influences, we might say. Alphecca is useful for that. So looking at our election chart here, we have Alphecca rising on the ascendant with the moon conjoined Alphecca. And at this time, the moon is applying the sextile to Venus in Capricorn, with Venus being, of course, the relating star, the planet that wants to relate and connect with people, that wants these kinds of relationships, that wants to help bring people together and people stick together. So I thought it was really thematically appropriate. The ruler of the first house in this chart is Mars here in Scorpio in the first house. Typically, we would want to avoid malefic planets in the first house, but because Mars also rules the first house, it's fine to have him placed there. Sort of the biggest issue with this chart is really more of the square of Saturn, which is at 9 degrees of Scorpio. So it's still very close to like the moon and the ascendant. It's all kind of in the past, technically. So this would be kind of a thing to weigh whether or not you want to utilize it for this or not. But that square is sort of like the one kind of like bad part in this election. So our final election that we're going to cover today is going to be for an Arcturus fixed star talisman for the Australian continent. And this is going to take place on December 1st at just after 10 a.m. This chart is set for like 10:09. And Arcturus is a fixed star that is really more health focused, more specifically like preventative health, or helping people kind of improve one's constitution, make one feel better, kind of a modality of healing that we're looking about here. Arcturus is a star that is very focused on the blood, or the liver. So, but it kind of goes beyond that, and I'll talk about that in a second. But basically the idea of Arcturus is that it helps to increase or improve the sanguine humor, to purify and strengthen the blood in the liver, to improve one's constitution, and one's general health. It's a really good sort of like general health and increased sort of optimism and happiness and excitability. It's a more make yourself more sanguine, which is a more social, a more optimistic, a more upbeat, a more expressive type of humoral expression than some of the other ones. So Arcturus can be a really great humoral remediation, especially for individuals who are more melancholic, which is the opposite of the sanguine. So when it comes to talking about the blood, we can see improvements in blood disorders with the utilization of Arcturus talismans, but the blood and the liver are a little bit more than that in kind of the Greek medical concepts, in that the blood as a as a life-giving substance also serves as sort of like a metaphor or indicator of one's general constitution and health levels. So even people who do not have like a blood disorder or something like that can get a lot out of Arcturus, and that it helps. Basically, Arcturus helps the liver make better quality humors in the Greek medical system. That's the idea. Which basically kind of translated into our own medical system means that Arcturus helps people's bodies get more out of what they put into it. So it can be really useful for individuals who are kind of readjusting to a dietary regimen or things like that, or even if not, just to help people get kind of better quality stuff out of the food that they consume. Better quality nutrition, better quality vitamins. Arcturus is a very kind of like nutritional focused talisman. So in our election chart here, we have the moon conjoined Arcturus on the midheaven, while she is applying the trine aspect to Jupiter here in Aquarius, conjoined the second house cusp. The ruler of the first house is Saturn in Aquarius in the first house. Typically we would want to avoid a malefic planet like Saturn in the first house, but because Saturn rules the first house, in this example, it's fine. Saturn has authority in the first house. He deserves to be here if he wants to be. He's not like a necessarily adverse influence on it like he would be if he was not the ruler of the first house. I also really like that the moon, the ascendant, the ruler of the first house, and Jupiter, the planet that the moon's applying to, are all in air signs. In astrology, the air signs represent the blood and the sanguine humor. So that's just kind of a nice little thing, a nice little cherry on top, I guess we'll say. And overall, I just feel like this is very useful, very helpful. 24 degrees Libra, many of you will know as the position of the fixed star Spica, but the moon's application to Jupiter in this chart, which is one of the planets that Arcturus is the nature of. Arcturus is the nature of Jupiter and Mars. This application with Jupiter marks this as being much more appropriate for an Arcturus talisman than it would be for a Spica talisman, where we would like to see the moon apply to Venus or Mercury, the planets that Spica is of the nature of. So just kind of keep that in mind. But all right, everyone, that's all that we have for this waning moon phase that we're experiencing right now. As the moon sort of moves over into more appropriate waning moon mansions, we'll have a little bit more to talk about, but this one was a little bit more of like a star party. We had like a lot more stars to talk about than we normally do, which is kind of neat in itself. But everybody take care. Good luck during eclipse season. Everybody hang in there. I know that November is generally kind of rough after we've just come off of the Saturn-Mars square. So, stay hydrated, get plenty of rest. Don't do anything too crazy. And then, during the eclipses, just clean and let go, so that the eclipses don't choose what we get to let go of.